The courtroom wasn't ready for what happened that morning. Cameras were rolling, the audience was restless, and Judge Judy sat behind her bench with that razor-sharp stillness she's famous for, the kind that makes people confess before they even speak. But then something no one expected happened. A woman in a loud floral dress, oversized sunglasses perched on her head, slammed her purse on the defendant's table and shouted, "You think you can humiliate me on national TV? I'm not scared of you, Judy." Before we dive into this incredible case, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where my viewers are around the world. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more unbelievable cases like this one. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. The room froze. The bailiff's eyes darted to Judy, waiting for her signal. Judy didn't move. She just raised one eyebrow, her fingers interlaced in front of her, her voice calm. Too calm. "Ma'am," she said, "you just made the biggest mistake of your day." Karen, that's what the internet would later call her, leaned forward, defiant. "You're outdated." "You think your name still means anything?" she snapped, her words dripping with arrogance, and that's when it happened. Judy leaned in slightly, just enough for the microphone to catch the softest whisper that somehow echoed through the room like thunder. "The only thing outdated in this courtroom," she said, "is your sense of decency." The audience gasped. Karen blinked, her mouth still open, but no words came out. Even the bailiff looked stunned. It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, but it was final. And that's the moment the internet would replay millions of times. The whisper that broke a woman louder than any gavel ever could. If you believe respect still matters, drop a comment saying respect wins and subscribe for more real moments that remind us why truth always finds its voice. Karen wasn't always the kind of woman who yelled at a judge. There was a time when she blended into the world quietly. Another voice in the grocery line, another driver in traffic. But life has a way of feeding certain people a steady diet of frustration until it ferments into entitlement. For Karen, that bitterness had been brewing for years, and by the time she walked into Judge Judy's courtroom, she was already carrying a storm. That morning had begun like every other bad day, small, sharp irritations stacking like bricks. Her phone alarm didn't go off, her coffee machine overflowed, and her teenage daughter left another mess in the kitchen. By the time Karen was in her car, traffic had frozen to a crawl, and a billboard of Judge Judy's stern face glared down at her from above the freeway. It was almost poetic, like the universe was mocking her. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel, muttering to herself, "She's not better than me. None of them are." Her words bounced around the car like a mantra she didn't believe but desperately wanted to. It wasn't really about Judge Judy or even the case. It was about every person who had ever dismissed her, talked over her, or made her feel small. And in that courtroom, she saw them all. The case itself was minor, a dispute with a neighbor over property damage. But Karen wasn't here to resolve. She was here to win. To reclaim something she'd been losing piece by piece, control. The irony was that she didn't see how far she'd already lost it. When she first saw Judge Judy in person, something flickered behind her eyes. Not admiration, not respect, but something colder. Judy represented the authority Karen despised most, the kind that didn't shout to be heard, the kind that earned silence without asking. Inside, the lights were bright and merciless. Cameras caught everything. Every eye in the room seemed to measure her, and Karen hated being measured. So she raised her voice, interrupted, overcompensated. Every question Judy asked felt like an attack. Every pause an insult. Karen's defense was noise, pure, raw noise. But what no one saw was the crack forming under that noise. Her bills were piling up. Her marriage was failing. The world wasn't scared of her anymore. So she screamed to make sure it noticed her one last time. She didn't know it yet, but the quiet that was coming would be louder than anything she'd ever said. And somewhere behind that bench, Judge Judy had already seen it, the pattern, the pressure, the pain hiding under pride. That's why she stayed silent. Because Judy didn't just punish people, she read them. What Karen mistook for judgment was something else entirely. Patience. The kind of patience that only people who've lived through storms can offer to those still trapped inside one. As the cameras zoomed in, Karen's words began to lose rhythm. The tremble in her hand betrayed her. Her voice cracked mid-sentence. It wasn't the court that was against her. It was her reflection in every judgment she'd ever thrown at someone else. That's the moment Judy noticed what the audience hadn't yet. Karen wasn't just angry. She was unraveling, and before the end of that hearing, Judy would make sure the world saw not just the woman who screamed, but the truth she'd been running from. By the time Karen took her place behind the defendant's table again, the courtroom had shifted. The same audience that once watched her with curiosity now studied her like a lesson in pride. Her earlier outburst hung in the air like stale perfume, still there, impossible to ignore. Judge Judy, composed as ever, turned a page in her notes and looked up with the kind of patience that never needed to prove itself. "You said you wanted to be heard, ma'am," Judy began, her voice even. "So I'm listening." It was the invitation Karen didn't know she shouldn't take. She launched into another speech, louder this time, her voice climbing as she tried to justify everything she had done. Each sentence tangled with the last until it sounded less like reason and more like noise. She waved her hands, accused her neighbor of lying, accused the system of being rigged, and then, almost without realizing, accused Judge Judy of bias. The courtroom went quiet again, not out of shock but exhaustion. The plaintiff, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, shook her head slowly, almost pitying Karen. Even the bailiff shifted his stance, crossing his arms, watching her unravel. Judy didn't interrupt once. She just let Karen burn out her fire word by word. Every insult, every desperate defense only made the silence heavier. When Karen finally stopped to catch her breath, the stillness hit harder than any gavel could. Then Judy spoke, not with anger, but with that razor-sharp calm that sliced deeper than shouting ever could. "Are you finished?" she asked. Karen blinked, uncertain how to respond. "Because all I hear," Judy continued, "is someone mistaking volume for truth. You came here for justice, but you're fighting to win an argument no one else is having," the audience murmured. Karen's confidence faltered for the first time. She looked around, seeking an ally, but found only quiet eyes and folded arms. The realization crept in. The room wasn't on her side anymore. Judge Judy leaned back slightly, closing her notebook. "We're going to get to the facts now," she said, "and we'll see if they speak as loudly as you do." In that moment, the power shifted. Karen didn't know it yet, but the silence was already her verdict. The tension in the courtroom was no longer something you could see. It was something you could feel. Every breath seemed to echo. Karen stood there, her voice finally quiet, though her pride refused to step down. Judge Judy adjusted her glasses, the soft scrape of the frames against the desk cutting through the silence like a match being struck. "Let's review something together," Judy said, her tone deceptively calm. "You're accusing your neighbor of damaging your property, yet you've brought no proof. You interrupt, you insult, and you mistake emotion for evidence. Do you understand what that means?" Karen crossed her arms, her voice defensive but shaky. "It means you've already made up your mind because you don't like me." A low murmur rippled through the audience. Judy didn't flinch. She just leaned forward slightly, her eyes sharp as glass. "No, ma'am," she said evenly. "It means you're confusing justice with attention. And in my courtroom, those are not the same thing." The weight of those words sank deep. Even the cameras seemed to focus tighter, like they too were holding their breath. Karen's mouth opened, but nothing came out. She looked around, expecting someone to back her up, but all she found were the eyes of strangers watching her pride collapse in real time. Judge Judy closed the file in front of her. The thud of paper meeting wood was louder than a gavel. She set her pen down, clasped her hands, and looked at Karen with that signature mix of disappointment and strength. "You think being loud makes you powerful?" Judy asked quietly. "Power isn't how high you can raise your voice. It's how well you can stand when you've run out of noise." That line hit like truth dressed as thunder. The courtroom, filled with whispers moments ago, now felt sacredly still. Karen's defenses began to tremble. Her face, red from anger, now softened under something heavier. Realization. Her voice, once booming, was reduced to a fragile whisper. "I just wanted someone to listen." Judy's expression shifted barely. A flicker of understanding flashed in her eyes. Empathy, hidden beneath decades of discipline. But she didn't let it linger. "I am listening," Judy said. "That's the difference between us. You yell to be heard. I listen to understand. And right now I understand exactly what this is." Karen swallowed, her bravado crumbling. The audience was silent, no longer watching a court case, but something deeper, a lesson unfolding in real time. The camera zoomed in on Judy as she leaned closer, her voice now barely above a whisper. The kind that carried farther than shouting ever could. "The only thing outdated in this courtroom," she said softly, "is your sense of decency." The whisper echoed like a verdict. Karen froze, eyes wide, tears threatening but held back by pride. For a moment the air itself seemed to pause. Even the bailiff didn't move. Judy leaned back, her voice returning to its usual volume, smooth but sharp. "This isn't about politics. It's not about who you think you can intimidate. It's about respect. Something that doesn't go out of style no matter what generation you're from." Karen said nothing. Her shoulders sank as if the truth had finally caught up to her. And for the first time since the hearing began, she looked smaller, not in height but in ego. The bailiff gave a discreet nod. The audience, still stunned, began to breathe again. Cameras captured the moment, but the footage would never quite capture the weight of what hung in that room. One woman's arrogance meeting another woman's grace, and realizing which one truly held the power, Judge Judy's gavel didn't need to fall. The silence was the sentence. The room stayed frozen long after Judge Judy spoke. The cameras were rolling, but it felt as though the show had stopped, replaced by something more real, more human. Karen stood still, her throat tight, her mind trying to fight back with 1,000 justifications, but none of them came out. It was over. Not the case, but the noise. Judge Judy sat unmoving, her eyes fixed on Karen with a quiet authority that didn't need volume. "We're going to proceed now," she said. The control in her tone was surgical. No anger, no mockery, just truth wrapped in discipline. "Let's talk about facts, not feelings." The audience shifted in their seats, sensing a storm about to clear. Judy turned to the plaintiff, asked a few precise questions, and within seconds the truth unraveled neatly. A signed receipt, a dated photo, a witness statement. Everything Karen claimed was gone, erased by evidence as calm as Judy's voice. Every word that followed was methodical, deliberate, merciless in its simplicity. Karen tried to interject once, and that's not fair, but Judy raised her hand, and that single motion silenced her better than any bailiff could. "Fairness," Judy said, looking up, "isn't what you demand when you lose control. It's what you protect before you do." The audience murmured again, quietly this time, like they were in the presence of something sacred. Even the cameras couldn't look away. Judy continued reading from her notes, unhurried, unshaken. "The evidence clearly shows you were responsible for the damages. The plaintiff's account is consistent, yours is not. And that," she said, tapping the paper with her pen, "is the definition of losing a case. Not because of bias, but because of behavior." Karen's face turned red, then pale. Her lips trembled as she tried to hold her ground, but her voice cracked under the weight of her own reflection. "You don't know what it's like to be ignored," she whispered, barely audible. Judy looked up again, not with scorn, but with something deeper. "I know exactly what it's like," she said. "But I also know what happens when you let bitterness make your voice louder than your truth. It turns into noise. And that's what you brought here today." Karen blinked rapidly. It wasn't anger now, it was something else. The moment was turning, reshaping itself from confrontation into revelation. Judy leaned back in her chair, the faintest sigh escaping her. "You wanted to be heard, you were. Now I hope you listen." The gavel came down. Judgment for the plaintiff. But what followed wasn't applause or laughter. It was silence, heavy, meaningful silence. Karen didn't move. She just stood there, staring at the ground, her reflection caught in the glossy courtroom floor like a mirror she couldn't escape. The same floor she had stomped across in anger now felt like a stage she didn't deserve to stand on. Judy rose slowly, gathered her notes, and turned to leave. But before she stepped away, she glanced back once more. "Ma'am," she said, her voice softer than anyone expected. "Humility is the only thing that wins in this courtroom. You'll remember that long after you forget this case." The bailiff opened the door. Karen didn't respond, didn't argue. She just nodded, a small broken motion that spoke louder than every insult she'd thrown that day. The audience exhaled collectively as though witnessing the end of a storm. Outside, the cameras followed her, but even the reporters stayed quiet. Karen walked down the courthouse steps alone, the world suddenly too loud and too bright. Her phone buzzed with messages. Friends, co-workers, maybe even strangers who had already seen the clip circulating online. "Did you really talk to Judge Judy like that? You went viral. She destroyed you." Karen turned off her phone and sat on the cold concrete step, staring at the courthouse doors. For the first time, she wasn't angry. She was empty. The pride that once filled her had leaked out, leaving behind a hollow truth. She wasn't fighting Judge Judy. She was fighting the mirror. She thought about what Judy had said, that power isn't how loud you can speak. It's how you stand when you've run out of noise. Those words replayed in her mind over and over, no longer an insult but an anchor. Hours later, she went home, sat in her car for nearly 20 minutes before getting out. The echo of Judy's whisper lingered. "The only thing outdated is your sense of decency." And somehow it didn't sting anymore. It just felt true. The clip went viral overnight. Comment sections flooded with praise for Judy's composure, her elegance, her calm dominance. But among those comments, hidden between thousands of likes, was one that stood out. It was from an anonymous account. No profile photo, no name, just 6 words. "She was right. I was wrong. Nobody knew it was Karen, nobody needed to. The world had moved on, but she hadn't." That night she opened her laptop, searched for volunteer programs in her area, and signed up to mentor at-risk teens. Maybe, she thought, if someone had spoken to her with truth instead of judgment years ago, she wouldn't have ended up here. The next day, a local news station called, asking if she wanted to comment on her viral moment. She said no, Some stories, she realized, don't need another headline. They need silence. If you think Judge Judy handled this perfectly, comment "Silence wins" below. And don't forget to subscribe for more real moments of poetic justice that remind us power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. The days following the verdict passed like fog, slow, quiet, almost weightless. For the first time in years, Karen didn't have anyone to argue with. The house, once full of slammed doors and loud phone calls, was still. Her daughter tiptoed around her, unsure if her mother would explode again or just keep staring out the window the way she had since the hearing. The clip had spread everywhere. Millions of views, hundreds of reaction videos, people laughing, analyzing, praising Judge Judy's restraint. Karen avoided the internet for days, but there was no escaping it. Every time she stepped outside, she caught someone glancing, whispering. At the grocery store, a stranger muttered, "That's her." A cashier smiled politely but too knowingly. Even at the gas station, the radio replayed Judy's famous line, "The only thing outdated in this courtroom is your sense of decency." It haunted her, not in anger but in realization. Karen sat one night in her living room, TV flickering quietly. She rewound that same moment on YouTube, Judy's whisper, the crowd's gasp, the silence that followed. But this time she didn't feel humiliated. She felt seen. It was the first time she'd ever realized that maybe her voice had gotten too loud, trying to drown out something inside her. The next morning she did something unexpected. She drove to a local community center, the kind she used to dismiss as a waste of time. She walked in and asked if they needed volunteers. The woman at the desk blinked in surprise. "We always do," she said, handing Karen a clipboard. And just like that, a new kind of noise began in her life. The soft, good kind. The laughter of kids, the shuffle of paperwork, the clatter of coffee mugs. It wasn't easy. Some people recognized her. One teenager joked, "You're that lady from the meme." Karen smiled weakly and nodded. But instead of walking away, she stayed. She filed papers, cleaned tables, and eventually helped run workshops for single mothers. She started listening more than talking. Every now and then someone would bring up the clip. "You must hate her," they'd say. Karen always shook her head. "No," she'd answer quietly. "She helped me hear myself." Weeks later, the community center hosted a local talk for women about accountability and growth. They asked Karen if she'd speak. She hesitated, then agreed. Standing in front of a small group of women, she took a breath and began, "I once thought being right was the same as being respected. I was wrong. Respect isn't something you demand. It's something you learn when you finally stop shouting long enough to listen." Her words hung in the air for a moment. Someone clapped softly, then another, until the room filled with applause. Not the loud kind that feeds ego, but the warm kind that feeds change. That night, as she drove home, the city lights blurred through her windshield. For the first time, she wasn't replaying Judy's voice in her head. She was replaying her own, softer this time, steadier. She finally understood what the judge meant. Power wasn't about control. It was about calm. Meanwhile, back in the studio weeks later, Judge Judy sat through another round of cases. Another outburst, another argument, another loud voice trying to fill a void. But when one of her producers mentioned that the Karen episode had become one of the most watched in show history, she only smiled faintly. "Good," she said, closing a file. "Maybe someone out there learned something." That night, Judy walked out of the studio into the cool air, looked up at the quiet sky and muttered under her breath, "Silence wins again." For Karen, it already had. Her silence wasn't shame anymore. It was peace. The kind that comes when a person finally stops fighting the world and starts fixing themselves. Weeks later, the internet had already moved on to its next outrage, but the echo of that courtroom moment still lingered in quiet corners of conversation. Clips of Judge Judy's whisper resurfaced every few days, paired with captions like, "This is how you win without shouting." It had become a lesson disguised as entertainment. But for the two women at the center of it, the story had long since evolved into something deeper. Karen sat on her porch one evening, the sun sinking low behind the trees. Her daughter joined her, holding 2 mugs of coffee. For the first time in months, the silence between them didn't feel tense. It felt earned. "I saw a video of you today," her daughter said softly, almost teasing. "Someone called it the whisper that changed everything." Karen chuckled, not bitterly, not defensively, and just quietly. "Maybe it did," she said. "For me, at least." Her daughter smiled, and for the first time in a long while, Karen saw something in her eyes that wasn't fear or frustration. It was respect. The same respect Karen had spent years demanding, and only now had learned to deserve. Inside the courtroom world, Judge Judy never mentioned Karen's name again. She didn't need to. That moment had already carved itself into the culture, a symbol of control, grace, and authority that no amount of shouting could overpower. When asked about it in an interview months later, Judy simply said, "I don't raise my voice to make a point. I lower it so the truth has room to speak." That quote went viral too. Meanwhile, Karen kept her promise to change. Her volunteering turned into a part-time job, and her attitude turned into something closer to humility. She didn't erase her past, she owned it. And when people occasionally recognized her and asked, "You're that woman from Judge Judy, right?" she always smiled and said, "Yes, and I'm still learning." One afternoon, while sorting donation boxes, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the glass window. Calm eyes, relaxed shoulders, a soft half-smile. For the first time, she didn't see the woman who screamed in court. She saw the woman who listened. Life hadn't made her quieter. Wisdom had. The final echo of that day still lived somewhere on YouTube. Replayed millions of times, dissected, quoted, memed. But the real story wasn't what went viral. It was what stayed private. The moment a loud woman discovered the strength of silence, and a strict judge proved that mercy doesn't always sound like forgiveness. Sometimes, it just sounds like stillness. If you believe real strength is calm, not noise, comment "respect over noise" and subscribe. Because stories like this remind us, power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers.